When the East is mentioned, what often appears in the Western imagination is a timeless world, a place with no real past and no history moving toward the future. Everything seems frozen within the same image of splendor. Time does not move forward here. It merely repeats itself. For this reason, the East is imagined not as a space of change and transformation, but as a realm of continuity and stagnation. This sense of timelessness removes the East from real life. Social orders, economic relations, political structures, and intellectual conflicts fade from view. History gives way to myth. What happens is no longer explained through structures or processes, but through the whims of sultans, palace intrigues, and personal ambitions. In this narrative, the East is not a rational world. It is not a system governed by rules, but a stage directed by emotions, desires, and chance. Politics ceases to be an institutional order and becomes a space of arbitrariness. Society itself is stripped of agency and reduced to silent figures in the background of history. Yet timelessness is not innocence, it is exclusion. Because a world made timeless cannot make history. A place that produces no crises, undergoes no transformation, and answers to nothing cannot be a civilization. This is why turning the East into something timeless is not a way of honoring it, but a way of removing it from history. This situation is a direct manifestation of the West, presenting its own historical transformation as a universal model. While the West understands its past through crises, ruptures, and the idea of progress, it placed the rest of the world outside this narrative of transformation. In doing so, non-Western societies were removed as historical actors and pushed into timelessness and into superficiality. For the West, history is made of stages that must constantly be overcome. Antiquity, the Middle Ages, Modernity. Over time, this linear narrative became a universal measure of time itself. Yet this measure explained only the Western experience. Despite this, the same schema was applied to the rest of the world. As a result, while the West turned its own transformation into the norm, it positioned other civilizations as either not yet transformed or never transformed. The image of a timeless East is the product of this perspective. A world without history, a world meant only to be observed, reduced to surface, reduced to spectacle. What is required, therefore, is not to accept Western history as universal, but to pluralize the very idea of history itself. To rethink the non-Western world not through the stages the West passed through, but through its own crises, its own continuities, and its own forms of transformation. The aim of this series is not to create an easy opposition by claiming that Muslims were more advanced than the West during the Middle Ages. This is not a debate about superiority or backwardness. The real objective is to understand the crises each civilization produced within its own historical conditions, the responses it gave to those crises, and the paths of existence it carved for itself. The West constructed its history through the collapse of Rome, feudalism, the church, and modernity. The Islamic world, however, moved forward through a different social structure, a different understanding of knowledge, and different forms of continuity. This difference does not mean falling outside a universal line of development. On the contrary, it reveals that history is not singular, but plural. For this reason, what is attempted here is not to measure Islamic history by the stages the West passed through. Instead of asking, why did it not become like the West, we ask something else. How did it function within its own conditions? How did it transform? And how did it manage its crises? Because to understand a civilization is not to judge it in the mirror of another, but to read it through its own internal logic. This series does not seek to explain history through concepts produced by a single center. It aims to pluralize the very idea of history itself, not to repeat established categories such as the Middle Ages, but to show in which contexts these categories are meaningful, and in which contexts they cease to explain. And perhaps the most fundamental claim is this: the question is not why Islam had no Middle Ages. The real question is why we still insist on reading history through the language of a single civilization.